Welcome to this WaterWorld tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to run the land use change model to simulate a scenario of deforestation, and we're also going to run the new feature of progressive scenarios. So I'm going to start from a baseline that I've already run for this tile in Colombia. And so I can go straight to step 4 policy exercises. So we click on that and we're going to select the land use and cover change. And we're going to select run land use change model here. Now, the first thing we need to do is give our scenario a name. So I'm going to call this deforest, and then we can set the fractions of the land cover types in the model, so tree, herb and bare, to a given percentage. And so since this is a deforestation scenario we want to run, I'm going to set this to 80%, so minus 80 because it's deforestation, and I'm going to leave these to 0, and we'll let the model decide how to allocate these. And then what we can do now is we can project forward recent rates of deforestation. And so we have 4 different deforestation products in here. We have the Landsat GFC data from Hansen et al. We have the 500 meter resolution 16-day Forma alerts dataset. That's a series of national and global forest and fire alert datasets. And we have Terra I deforestation. The Forma dataset's only available for humid tropical forest areas, and Terra I is currently only available for Latin America. But we can also use a combination of these products. For this scenario I'm going to use the GFC dataset, and we're going to run this for 20 years into the future. We can multiply the recent rate, so we can speed up deforestation if we want, but in this case I'm just going to leave it to linear rate. And if you have no deforestation in your area, you can add a percentage forest loss here, which I'm also going to leave to 0 for now. We can allocate by agriculture suitability, if available by plant infrastructure and likely new transport routes. And then finally we can set the management effectiveness option, and that's essentially an option to allow deforestation in protected areas or not. So if we set this to, for instance, 0.8, then we allow for some deforestation, 20%, in protected areas. And then finally we can target where we want the deforestation to happen by using a mask, but we can also just apply it everywhere, and so we can just leave this to study area mask above 0, and that will apply it throughout the tile that I selected. And then finally we can define our converted areas and give it a land use type, and in this case I'm going to give it cropping with a land use intensity of 1. So let's set up this scenario, and then once that's set up, it'll take a few minutes, we'll set it running. So the scenario is now ready building, and we now have a few options. We can have a look at the scenario, or we can stack some further changes to create a compound scenario, or we can run it straight away, or we can do progressive scenarios, which we're going to do later, or we can have a look at some of the data. Now the first thing to do when we have set up a scenario obviously is to have a look and see if it makes sense. So I'm going to click on show baseline and scenario, and that allows us to compare some of the maps that have changed for this scenario. So the main change, obviously, since this is a deforestation scenario, will be in the tree cover of tree covered ground. So if I click on that, we hope to see a change in the tree cover, which we do. On the left we see the baseline, where we have a mean tree cover of 37% throughout the tile, and on the right we have the scenario tree cover, which has a mean of 31.1%, and we can clearly see those areas where we have deforestation taking place. And since we set the land use type after deforestation to croplands, we expect to see a huge increase in croplands for those areas. So these are the areas where the land use change model has projected forward recent rates of deforestation. So once you're happy with the scenario and we see the changes that we expect to see, I'm going to close this window now, and we can then set the scenario running. So I'm going to click on run scenario and that will automatically set the model running. And as you can see, the option to write maps or not write maps is already locked by the baseline, so you don't have to actually set the model running as such. It will start running straight away when you click run scenario. So we have now finished running our scenario, so I can close the run scenario window and we can have a quick look at some of the results. So obviously what we expect is to see quite a bit of change in our water balance. So let's have a quick look at that before moving on. So in our results we can indeed see that we have quite a bit of an increase in water balance in those deforested areas as a result of less water used by trees, and also some small areas where we have some decreases in water balance, but overall we see an increase, as we can see from the positive mean that we have here. So I'm going to close this now, and we're going to move on to running the progressive scenarios, and we can do that by clicking our scenario here at the top, and that allows us to see all the values for the variables that we set for our scenario. So in this case I can see we've done the deforest scenario, we set tree to -80%, we ran it for 20 years and we converted our land to croplands, etc. You can also look at your scenario here. What I'm going to do now is we're going to try and run some progressive scenarios. So I'm going to click on progressive scenarios, and that opens up this window where we can change parameter values for all the settings in our scenario. And so in this case we can make changes to the scenario that will be run progressively. So for instance, we can change the number of years, as we will do now. And the option to do progressive scenarios is very useful because you don't have to set up the full scenario every time you want to make some changes to any parameter in your scenario. So what it will do, it will realize a new scenario in 4 steps. So you get 4 extra scenarios, and in this case, for instance, I'm going to continue this scenario from 20 to 200 years, and so it will then do 4 even steps from 20 to 200 years and continue the deforestation. And we can obviously also make any other changes, so we can change the management effectiveness, or we can speed up the deforestation, but for now I'm just going to set the number of years from 20 to 200, and I'm going to click submit. The only thing with the progressive scenario is that because it builds 4 new scenarios on top of the scenario you've already done, you need to make sure you have enough space available, because with the baseline you will need a total of 5 runs available to do this. So you need to clear out any old runs that you don't need before trying to set this up, or the system won't be able to build your scenarios. So it's now going to set up those 4 progressive scenarios, so that's going to take a while. Okay, so now all scenarios have built, so we can now close this window and we can have a look at some of the scenarios. So I'm going to close this now, and the way to have a look at scenarios or progressive scenarios is by going to Manage Simulations, select or extend, and then under your baseline run you will see the 4 scenarios that have been produced for the progressive scenarios. And what we now can do is we can compare alternatives, and so this allows us to compare all the scenarios based by the choices you make of what kind of maps you want to look at. And all the input maps are here that WaterWorld needs to run, but also once you have done all the runs, all the result maps will be here as well. So in this case, obviously we did a deforestation scenario, so let's have a look at the cover of tree covered ground. Now the system will automatically open up the baseline covered of tree covered ground. I'm gonna close that. I'm going to submit, and that will bring up a comparison of all those scenarios that we just set up. So our comparison is now built, and so it gives us the cover of tree covered ground, the change in cover of tree covered ground, and percentage change. So if I click on the plus next to here, what you see is an overview of your baseline and all your scenarios. So we have the initial deforestation scenario based on 20 years of forward projected deforestation, and then we have our progressive scenarios, which is 4 equal time steps up to 200 years. And what you can see clearly is that our deforestation rapidly increases until there's hardly any forest left in our final time step. And so I just realized as well that the map that was shown initially when I clicked on compare alternatives for tree cover was actually the final output map and not the baseline map. And so this is a great way of quickly looking at the changes that are occurring under your scenario. And again, you can do this for your input maps, but this also allows you also are able to do this for your output maps, and you have all the usual options available to you. So you can display and geo-browse the map, you can pop them out, etc. You can look at the histograms, and we can look at the percentage changes. And so I'm going to close that now and go back to this window. So compare alternatives again allows you to look at, to compare the alternatives for the scenarios as you just built them, but you can also look at output maps once you have done all the individual runs. Now to do the runs for progressive scenarios, you will have to run each build scenario individually. The system is not able to run these consecutively, so in order to get this started we will have to click on start this run, wait until it's finished, and then move on to the next. And so it will take a while to do all those runs, and I'm not going to do this for this tutorial, but obviously once you have done that you can then compare alternatives and look at the differences.